All right, so welcome to HathiTrust Community Week, Day 3, and to this workshop, Opening Access to Post-1926 Serials in HathiTrust. I'm Graham Detmers, the metadata analyst at HathiTrust. My pronouns are he, him, and before we get to the fun stuff, I have a little housekeeping to go through. Next slide. First, we want to take a minute to remind everyone that HathiTrust events adhere to our HathiTrust Code of Conduct, which you can read here. It can also be found on our website and will be posted to the chat shortly. Next slide. Be sure to keep your cameras off and your microphone muted for the duration of this session. If you have questions during this workshop, please type them into the chat, and my colleague Melissa Stewart will be keeping track of them, and then we'll read them at the appropriate time. Closed captioning is available for this presentation, and a link to the slides will be available in chat probably several times. This session is also being recorded, as you no doubt noticed. We plan to post the session on our YouTube channel, and we will also email you a link to the recording and the slides after the presentation. If you are having any technical issues, you can send a private chat message to Melissa, and they'll assist you. So you can also tweet about Community Week using this hashtag, and don't forget to play the HathiTrust bingo game, also being linked. And now over to Mark Ockerbloom to get the workshop started. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Can folks hear? Good. I'm Mark Ockerbloom. I'm from the University of Pennsylvania. My pronouns are he and him. And I'm joined today by Christina Hall from the University of Michigan and Jonah McAllister-Erickson from West Virginia University, Nicolle Nicastro from Penn State University, and Scott Pope from Texas State University. And we'll be talking today about work we've been doing to investigate whether we can open access to serials in HathiTrust from the mid-20th century, basically from past 1926, the last year where everything is basically in the public domain, and also to investigate how we can do that. This is a two-part session. So in the first part is more of the presentation and Q&A. You'll get to hear about the work we've been doing, about the HathiTrust pilot. We will hear about what we've produced and what we've learned. We'll review how HathiTrust identifies public domain materials. We'll talk about some of the resources that are now available to deal with serial copyrights and really research copyrights of any sort. Those include the deep backfile knowledge base, which we'll talk about later in the presentation, and also about a guide that we've prepared and you can use or adapt to help you make copyright decisions about serials or other content you have of interest. We'll talk about the pilot project that all 5 of us participated in at HathiTrust, where we use some of those resources to investigate the status of serials in HathiTrust and what we learned from that pilot. And finally, we'll talk about, based on what we learned, some things that we could use to make further and faster progress with opening this content and making it available to the world. So that's the first part of the program. In the second part, you'll get to do a number of other things. You can continue some of the work that we've actually started and described. So if you're interested, one of the things we'll be talking about is the need for searchable, accurate, renewal records for images. And one of our breakouts will let people actually format and proofread some raw CR for that we can make searchable. And that one is actually that breakout has somewhat limited attendance because of the number of files, among other things. And Nicolle just put into the chat a link to a sign-up sheet. So if you know you want to be in that breakout, put your name down there and you'll be sure to be assigned to a particular part of that session. If you just want to just listen and not actually edit a file, you don't necessarily need to sign up, but it's nice to know if you're there. We'll also be another breakout. We'll be looking at some of the deep backfile copyright information for serials in HathiTrust, and I'll show you how to actually add information to that knowledge base, and you can research some serials of interest to you. And in the third breakout, of particular interest to people like bibliographers, we can talk about selecting specific HathiTrust serials or areas of interest, of special interest for possibly opening up or doing more research on. And then finally, there'll also be, if you would rather participate in discussion, then Christina will actually be leading a workshop in the main section, talking about practical issues that come up both with serial copyright research and with copyright research in general, which she's done a lot of. So there'll be a number of interesting things to do and talk about in the second half of the program. And as I just mentioned, if you want to be in the format and proofread image copyright renewals, please sign up for the on the sheet that Nicolle has posted to the chat. All right. Any questions about generally how we're structuring this session before I start? As Jonah points out, the one about selecting things is not just bibliographers, but really anybody who's interested in using or knows of somebody interested in particular serials is welcome to participate in that breakout. Okay. If there are no further questions, I will continue. We'll start the presentation. So, HathiTrust, as you know, has a wealth of open information, open volumes at this point, and that's thanks to a lot of metadata and a lot of work. Most of the stuff that's open currently, there's over 7 million volumes, I believe, that are freely available in HathiTrust, and that's in over 3 million specific cataloged items, such as serials and monographs. Most of those items are open because of automated analysis of the metadata. They look at things like publication date, country of origin, and whether the metadata indicates that something is a US federal government publication or a Crown government publication. And you can use algorithmic analysis to then decide based on that whether it should be open or closed. And I should point out, even though it's automated analysis, that metadata was originally, in most cases, created by people and put in by human labor. And I want to acknowledge that because so human labor goes into that. And it also, of course, goes into more immediate direct human review that happens with material in HathiTrust. So some of the material in HathiTrust has there because of explicit permission by the rights holders. People have either created Creative Commons licenses for them or otherwise given permission to HathiTrust to open them up. And we appreciate that as well. But one other important source, especially of material after 1926, that's now available in HathiTrust is the Copyright Review Program. And that's something that many of you or many of your libraries have participated in over time, reviewing copyright through the Copyright Review Management System. And you've been extremely productive. As of this summer, I saw an announcement that over 1 million volumes have now been reviewed, and over 500,000 of volumes have been opened thanks to the work of people in this program. The reviews at this point are largely concentrating on books and monographs, not serials. And the reviews include things like searching copyright records for renewals, looking for copyright notices, and analyzing the content of volumes to see if there are any complications that might cause problems if you opened up the content. As I said, it's largely been monographs and books. One issue that's been limiting it for serials is serials have more complex content. So to date, there hasn't been a large-scale initiative to open those. But as we'll see, we now have data and workflows that we've tested out in our pilot that make it feasible to start actually doing reviews like this for serials as well in many cases. And now we'll describe what's involved with that. So serials, just like books, can be open past 1926 or public domain past 1926 for various reasons. So like books published in the US, serials published in the US, if they were published before 1964, had to have a copyright renewal, usually filed 28 years after the initial copyright. One complication with serials is you can renew the copyright for the issue, or you might renew copyright on an individual contribution, an article or a story that appeared in that serial issue. That complicates matters somewhat. Fortunately, things are simplified somewhat in that the renewal records for the contributions mention the serial that they were first published in. And we use that to help build a knowledge base that you could rely on more thoroughly than having to review or research every individual contribution by itself. The other important thing about serials, copyright and US copyrights in general, is that if you published before 1989 in the United States, you had to publish with a copyright notice. And some books were not published with copyright notice, but in fact, a number of serials that weren't normally commercially published or available in a newsstand were also published without copyright notices. For instance, if it was an informal publication from a hobbyist or say a group of scholars, or a nonprofit organization, they just want to get their issues out, and in many cases, they published and distributed without copyright notices. And those things, if they were published before 1989 in the US, are now in the public domain. Again, with serials, there are some complications. One important one is that when we bind our serials and when we scan them, often we drop certain pages, maybe covers, add pages, or other things like that. And if we've done that, there's always the chance that a copyright notice appeared on one of the pages we omitted. So you need to be careful not to jump to conclusions prematurely based on that. Also, additional complications, which are also present for books, are that if the publication did not originally appear in the United States, but originally appeared elsewhere, or is derivative of something that originally appeared elsewhere, they're exempt from these requirements for renewals or notice in most cases. And it can sometimes be hard to verify. There are some that aren't exempt, but it can be hard to figure out which ones aren't. Also, again, like books, but probably more often, serials may include content that is problematic or difficult to do. Some serials may reprint things from other serials, such as Reader's Digest reprinting from other magazines, or they may include material with their own specialized copyright, such as sheet music, play scripts, or things like that, which have renewals in different places than the usual contributions to periodicals that we've actually done surveys of. So that's potentially complicated as well. And finally, there are some types of serials that might not actually be registered or renewed as periodicals. And that includes things like irregular monograph series, a lot of annuals or law reviews or like that as well. So there are various cautions you can do, but it's possible to build, as you will see in a bit, procedures that take all of this into account and decide, yes, this looks to be public domain. No, this isn't public domain, or it's complicated. So let's talk about some of these resources. One of the important resources that's used for copyright research of all sorts is the actual copyright records. And thanks to scanning by Google Books and by the Library of Congress Copyright Office, we have records, basic records of all copyright registration and renewals online now. Before 1978, they were published in a series of printed volumes called the Catalog of Copyright Entries. This was published by the Copyright Office. It's been scanned. You can find volumes actually in HathiTrust and also scans from the Copyright Office itself on the Internet Archive. After 1978, or from 1978 onward, copyright records, including renewals in both cases, are also available in an online searchable database supplied by the Copyright Office. And one thing we did at Penn early on is we created a page with links to copyright resources such as these. So here, for example, at the top of the page with the URL you see here, you'll find where you can basically just go straight to the copyright records for whatever year you're interested in, scanned or available, searchable online at these various places. But we will also find links to a number of other resources. One thing I mentioned is that, as I say, serials, both issues and contributions of serials could potentially have copyright renewals. However, it's the case that actually relatively few serials had any copyright renewals of any sort, whether it's images or contributions. And furthermore, the parts of the catalog of copyright entries that have these renewals are short enough that we were actually able, with the help from IMLS grant some years ago, to actually sweep through the catalog of copyright entries up through 1977 and identify every periodical that had a renewal recorded with its title in the appropriate sections of the catalog of copyright entries. And we listed them all on this page here. Again, you'll have, at the end, we'll have links to all of these places. So in particular, if there was any serial issue or volume that you're interested in that was published in the US before 1950, which means it had to renew before 1978, it will be on this list. And if it's not on this list and it's a normal periodical that isn't one of those weird ones I talked about earlier, then chances are good that the material is in the public domain. Well, that tells us what serials and periodicals, I should say, have copyright renewals, but what about all the ones we're interested in that might not have? So another project we started sometime afterwards is something called the deep backfile. And what we decided to do here is we knew that there were a number of packages, bundles of serials that we were interested in. In some cases, there were things we subscribed to, like Science Direct from Elsevier, or JSTOR, or Cambridge University Press journals, or what have you. We realized that what we could do is basically download their offerings and create little data tables with information about, first of all, the renewals we knew about, but also tables that could be filled in with information from the other serials. So maybe another serial, we hadn't found renewals in the catalog of copyright entries, but maybe there were renewals mentioned in the online database from later on. Or maybe there aren't any renewals. But in any case, this deep backfile page would give links to various of these packages that people could investigate and report on what they found. And then once we double check that, we could post that information available for other people to see. So that happened, and we invited people to participate in it, and we started filling things in, and progress was going along fairly slowly. But then the COVID crisis happened, and we locked down our library, as many libraries do, and a lot of our librarians were sent home. And for a lot of the people who had been working in the libraries, there was the question of, well, what can we have them do? And we realized that one of the things we could have them do was do research on copyrights for these journals and the other serials. In particular, we could have them research serials that we knew that Penn owned, and that we could potentially make available. And now, fortunately, one of the nice things about the lockdown is, as many of you know, is that we could still get access to many of these serials via HathiTrust Emergency Temporary Access Service. And our patrons appreciated that very much. And we were able to use this ourselves in this project to examine some of the serials we were researching. But once that was over, the hope is that once we identify that many of them are in fact public domain, although not obviously so, those could continue to be made open either through HathiTrust or through some other agency or ourselves or somebody else. So that's what we did. We had probably close to 40 people working on various aspects of this by the time we were done with it. There were a couple of dozen that were doing deep backfile research, answering a questionnaire about certain serials. And again, we'll be doing that ourselves, some of you who go to one of the breakouts. Other people were doing things like producing training materials, creating Wikidata entries for them. We'll show you a little bit later why that's important. But we managed to get a lot researched. This is our deep backfile table for Penn libraries. It's got over, I think, 11,000 serials in it. We didn't get to quite all of them, but we researched, I believe, by the end of the lockdown, we'd researched over 8,000 titles from here. I'm still reviewing some of them. There's about 3,000 left to review, but those should be information should all be accessible within the next year or two. And in many cases, we have information not only about copyrights or when their first renewal was, which you see in one of the columns here, but also information on free issues, some of which are available on HathiTrust, some of which are available from other sources as well. We also have links to other sources of information such as Wikidata. When people were researching serials in this deep backfile, they would basically go down to one of these things where the first renewal column here says unknown. And then they would click on the link on the right that says contact us, and they would be taken to a questionnaire. So in this case, imagine somebody went down to the Southwestern Journal of Anthropology and they clicked on the link there because we didn't have information on this. This is the start of the questionnaire to be shown. Some of it has already been auto-filled by the thing, the title and the ISSN. And then there'll be a short questionnaire that asks some basic questions that are both relevant to the copyright and also something that people can easily, well, not easily, but answer without too much difficulty that are relevant, such as, is the serial from the US or from somewhere else? Well, you can tell that from the catalog entry where the place of publication is. Are there any renewals mentioned in that inventory of renewals that I showed you earlier? Is it in that list? Can you find any if you search the Copyright Office database? And again, we'll show people how to do that. And a few other questions as well that we ask about copyrights or online availability. Once people answer those questions, they can then go back to the table and research other ones, and that submission is then made available to me or other copyright reviewers. And we can fill in information on the table based on that. Here you see again our detail from the table. We haven't filled in information in Southwestern Journal of Anthropology yet, but we have information, for example, on the Southwestern Historical Quarterly. Here we found that there are no copyright renewals filed for it, and there's actually a bunch of it online. And for the Southwest Review, there was a copyright renewal, and the earliest one we found that's still active is from 1928. We can click on that 1928 and go to the full record that we have on this in the deep backfile. I will show you that right now. This is probably more filled out than many records, but basically what this shows is, yes, we know about the Southwest Review. We know when it started publishing, and we know from having done some copyright research that there are in fact no renewals made for issues of this serial. However, there were renewals made for some contributions. The first one is from January 1928. So in this particular record, so that's all you might see in a basic record. This particular record has been filled out a little bit more because somebody was interested in it. And that includes things like specifics on what contributions were renewed from 1928 and possibly from later on. It also has a number of links to other sources of information, including Wikidata, as I mentioned, including to the Wikipedia article and to JSTOR, which is useful for looking up, say, tables of contents, even if you don't subscribe to JSTOR. And this is all useful and also usable by humans and also by machines, because this isn't a static web page. This is actually generated by a JSON file, which is structured linked data. And that JSON file is used to generate this page, and it's also used to generate the row you saw in the table earlier before. As linked open data, it can be repurposed for any number of uses, including copyright research and other things as well. We've linked it to Wikidata, and Wikidata is an increasingly important hub for information of all sorts about publications, both serials and journals, and also individual articles or stories or scientific research or what have you. In fact, a very large proportion of the data that's now in Wikidata relates to bibliographic information in one way or another. If you look at the top properties, which are basically the types of assertions that are in there, a lot of the top assertions have to do with bibliographic information of some sort, whether that's copyright information, such as we are compiling for deep backfile, or other information about the publication, what appeared in it, who edited and wrote it, and so on. One of the nice things both about Wikidata and about our deep backfile is it's all completely open. It's Creative Commons 0, which means it's effectively public domain. Anybody can use this data for any purpose and download it. And this is different from some other big pools of bibliographic data, in that nobody is trying to monopolize the use of this, either whether through claiming proprietary rights over the data or by monopolizing the tools used to maintain or use it. So we find that particularly valuable. So we've got all this data. What can we do with it then? One of the things we did out of the IMLS grant I mentioned earlier is we also developed a questionnaire, which you can use as basically a flowchart for determining whether a particular issue or volume of a serial you're interested in is in the public domain. And again, it goes through a series of this 10 sections. This is just the start of it here. And again, this is linked online. And again, it goes through a list of questions, some of which I've mentioned before, such as what country is it from? What renewals do you know about? Have you searched various other things for renewals? And are there various aspects of the journal, such as, is it an annual? Does it have sheet music or other complications that might make your decision not quite so straightforward as normal? But our hope was, and we actually had a couple of lawyers review this, is that people could use this and adapt this for their own copyright determination purposes. And we made the this guide is CC BY. So again, although you need to give attribution and mention whether you've changed it, you're free to adapt it as you see fit for whatever workflows make sense for you. So given that we've got data and we've got decision guide for potential workflows, the question then comes up is, can we actually start applying this and start opening serials elsewhere? And particularly, can we potentially be opening up serial content in HathiTrust? And although, as I said, this is not started in any large scale yet, our initial investigation suggests that yes, this could be done. In particular, and toward that end, I've actually created another deep backfile table that has selected serials in HathiTrust, far from all of them, but sort of the low-hanging fruit, ones that are published in the US in a time period that might mean they're out of copyright, and that also have Wikidata records, which help select the ones that tend to be significant enough that somebody created such a record. And also, the other nice thing about Wikidata record is it helps you deduplicate things that you might have like duplicate entries of in HathiTrust. So yeah, we took this then, information like this, and working with Christina decided to organize a pilot where we would actually start doing some of this research and see what we found out. So I will turn it over to her to talk about the next bit.
Thanks, John. All of your work that you did creating the determinations guide and the inventory of first renewals is absolutely what enabled me to even consider this pilot. So thank you. I want to give my extreme gratitude to you. So my name is Christina Hall. My pronouns are she, her. I lead the copyright review program for HathiTrust, which is made up of, it has been up to 50 people active at any time. And they are just people who are contributing their time from our member libraries, doing copyright review. And we steward a broad collection in HathiTrust of serials, contributed by you all, by our membership. And I hope to improve our knowledge of copyright renewals for US serials, because although we have 14 years experience reviewing monographs, serials had always seemed a little bit out of reach, scary, complicated, and we knew that there were not very good resources at the time for trying to research them. So John's having that detailed guide for how to review serials and also the inventory of first renewals was absolutely the foundation that we needed to get going on a pilot. In spring of 2021, John and I were fortunate enough to have contributed time from several people from HathiTrust member libraries who were interested in also learning this with us. I put together a basic project plan, and we started preparing for a pilot in the summertime. And HathiTrust kind of does not accept legal determinations from outside sources. And so the first step we had to do was assess John's decision guide. And I'm pleased to say we had strong support for it. We put it through its paces, and it is solid. So I would highly recommend you using that guide if you are trying to teach yourself how to do review of US serial content. The next thing that we had to do was discuss risk, reasonable search, and inserts with the University of Michigan Copyright Office, because we were kind of determining that other stuff and what the risk might be. We selected a candidate pool, and we chose to go with US local and history content because we thought it would not be super easy, but also had a high chance of being public domain and would give us a variety of ideas of what we might run into in doing other types of serial content. So I drafted a workflow, including how to use those data sources that John just showed to you. We held a kickoff meeting and trainings with the pilot team. And then we worked for 11 weeks during the summer of 2021, just reviewing through serials, gathering data on them, and we got through 100 titles. And after that, we assessed the outcomes and made some recommendations to HathiTrust about whether this could be an operational project, an official project going forward. So go ahead into the next slide, please, John. We put together a pilot team from people actively working on other HathiTrust copyright projects. They had a working knowledge of US copyright renewals and are also familiar with the way we build and manage HathiTrust copyright review projects, which was important because I not only wanted them to learn how to review serials, but to also offer insight and feedback into how to build a curriculum, how to structure our software for data collection, and for our software also manages the work of remote people putting in time. And so I wanted to know, do we work singly? Do we work in pairs? How do we validate our results? And so they all were excellent in talking through everything with me during this pilot. We had we had a set period of time because I didn't, as some copyright projects can do, can go on forever. And we said, no, we need to end it at the end of summer. So we set an end date in August, and that means we only worked through 103 serial titles. And again, we opted to do US local history serials because we thought it would be interesting to do during the summer and also a good variety of content. Go ahead to the next slide, please. The basic requirements for a serial to be in scope for our copyright review is it had to be a US published serial, because we are only talking about US copyright, US renewals here. It had to be between 1927 and 1963, although we could have gone to 88. That would be for as John mentioned, that the formalities changed over certain periods of time. And so when we were really trying to check the renewal requirements, that's going to end in 63. And from then on, it would be more of a check for copyright notice. So we were focusing on English works because that's the language most common for our group and our skill set. And it had to be held in HathiTrust because we were using access to the in copyright scans in order to check them. We were not pulling from the shelf and looking at physical copies. We were looking at digital scans. And so we tried to build an ideal candidate pool that would avoid, we were concerned about syndicated content like comic strips, digests, and popular magazines, because we thought they would be impossible to clear and have a lot of content that would be problematic. And we wanted to get things that would have a greater chance of ending up with a public domain determination that we could open it. So better options for us were scholarly journals, original writing and research, and that ended up for us being local interest in US history. Go ahead and forward slide. Our objective, so we were learning more and we were preparing to make a case for HathiTrust legal and executive decision to validate a process for us and also to kind of inform the building of an official copyright review project. So we were not solely about just opening serials. In fact, we really didn't get to a point of being able to open access to many of the things we reviewed yet, but we learned a lot. So our objectives for the pilot were to test the guide in a working environment of copyright review for HathiTrust. We were building expertise within our team, and we were also exploring topics that were beyond just the copyright review, such as how to select what to review. And that is going to be one of the breakout room topics if you're interested in talking about value or what should be opened or what should be worked on, selecting what to review, how to support and motivate a reviewer team. We were testing the tools and learning them too, and then deciding what data to collect and how it needed to be collected and stored. Go ahead. So this example is why I have my background, the American Bee Journal. It's a pretty good example to show you kind of some of the things that we were thinking through. It is not a local history title, but it is one that I have continued reviewing serials past the endpoint of our pilot and keep learning more about it. So we went through John's step-by-step guide to determining the status of US serials, and the inventory of first renewals really, really helps for getting your bearings on the overall status of the series. So on this one, the American Bee Journal, we're looking at the volume 95 from 1955. And as you can see from the page from the inventory, it says that there are no issue renewals found in the CCE, which is the catalog of copyright entries, or in the registered works database. And that means I know that John's validated it and cleared it through 1963. There are no renewals for the American Bee Journal, and there are no renewals for contributions, such as like articles or chapters contributed. So that gets me an overall picture of this journal. But there are other questions we have to answer. Is it a US publication? I think that one could be pretty easily answered by looking at the thing. Would it have been registered as a book? Is it a monographic series, possibly? I think also that was a pretty easy one for us to answer. The one that gave us trouble was checking for included materials such as photographs, music, maps, drama, syndicated content, reprints. So go ahead to the next page, John. One of the differences from monographs is that the table of contents often does not tell you that there's reprinted content. So as you can see on this one, on the table of contents, the fact that no bees, no melons is reprinted from another journal is not acknowledged in the table of contents. So how do you find that? This is one of the things we were testing out different methods. And one of the ways we've done it is to do search of the OCR in HathiTrust. Often the notice of reprint will be on the page with the article itself. And so then you have to check the snippet view on the left. You can see that there's clearly some bad OCR in this, but it did help highlight the fact that this article needed to be looked at. And so that's one of the things that we continue working through is how do you discover and highlight potential large blocks of text that are reprinted from another source that could have a separate copyright based on the renewal of that source. Go ahead to the next one, John. One of the other things that I've been working through is like, do we even have to go look it up if the content itself looks like it might not be creative enough expression to be protectable? So this example is, I think, a factual drawing of an item of nature. There's one way to express it correctly, and that's as it appears in nature. So we saw a lot of this as well, like data tables, statistics, and they would say reprinted by permission. There was a lot of reusing of graphs, tables, and stats. And do you even have to go look those up? And so that's another question we're working through, like factual information. Go ahead and advance. Now there are on some occasions, but I'd say not as many as I'd expected to find, where you do come across something that you clearly see has a renewal and copyright. And this is one of the cases. So this is in the American Bee Journal, and it is reprinted from Popular Mechanics. And as you can see from John's page in the inventory of serial renewals, Popular Mechanics was renewed. And I did in fact check this particular issue, and it was renewed. So this article has copyright protection by being printed in Popular Mechanics. So then what do you do with that? Does that keep the entire year's worth of American Bee Journal closed because there's one article? So that's a good question to talk through. If you want to talk through that with me, I'll be in the breakout room. And go ahead, one more, John. And the last thing that we are kind of working through is copyright notice of things that appear to be more likely renewed as artwork. And so this is an example of US cast iron pipe advertisement, and they clearly hired an artist. And they did this for about 5 years in a row. They were hiring different artists to create fine art, I think, of steel workers laying pipe. And some of it had artist names on it, like Dean Cornwell and Lynn Ward, and there were a few others. And I thought, oh, I think these may have had a chance of renewal as artwork. And this is one of the things that a breakout is going to do as well, is we don't have a very good source for easily checking the renewals of artwork. There was not much renewed, but in order to be certain, it's good to do a check. And so some of the artwork renewals have transcriptions through Project Gutenberg, but there's a gap where we do not have those transcriptions to search. And so, you know, we researched these, and these images were not renewed. And so therefore I can open up the Journal of American Waterworks in HathiTrust. Go ahead, John. So what we learned from the pilot, well, we knew it, researching serials is slow. So to me, that means that we need to be thoughtful about selecting what titles to prioritize for review, so that we don't take 12 years and just randomly start with whatever comes up. I think we have to be better than random. We have to talk about what's of value to put the time and effort into. The other thing is that you get into a flow and you begin to see patterns, like certain subject matter, they reprinted articles from each other to kind of get the word out, particularly medical journals. Like they've got an important public health article, they're going to reprint it in several of the same year in articles, in journals that kind of overlap topics. If everything's new and varied, it takes a longer time to get your bearings, and it's better to work on like similar groups of materials. The other thing is that serials are more difficult to navigate in the HathiTrust digital format. You get an entire year's worth of that serial bound together. It can be 1,000-page count. It can be slow loading, difficult to navigate. You're sitting there waiting for the pages to load, and there's no good internal navigation links. So that's kind of a challenge for us to be able to navigate them, to find where the content that we need to look at is. We learned absolutely that the renewal information in John's resources is so helpful in getting a jump start on a review. And then basically all you have to do is some mop-up work if you find photographs or reprinted articles. And we learned that we have lots more questions arising from what we learned. So questions on images, what to do with reprinted articles, and also noticing content from reprinted from foreign publications as well in a US publication. So if you want to dig into any of these things, I've kind of put what breakout you would go to if you wanted to talk more about these things, or even lurk and just listen to other people chatting about them. I think that's the end of my slides. Oh, next step. We've had a lot of legal and policy conversations already. We'll continue to have more. We do have system development in progress, and then I'll be probably doing curriculum planning, communicating with members, looking for a group of reviewers to start possibly in 2023, and then start slow with a targeted group of serials, US serials. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So as Christina was saying, there's progress already underway from this pilot, and there's more work that can be done as well. So yes, longer term, we can potentially be expanding the workflows and what HathiTrust is doing to handle more serials and better. For that matter, we can have individual libraries, including libraries of folks in the call, maybe establishing their own processes to copyright clear and digitize historic runs of interest based on the materials we've shown here. Short term, there are also a few things that we can actually accomplish now to help move things forward, and we'll be doing some of these things in the workshops. As Christina mentioned, it would be nice to have easier ways to search for copyrights and images. The renewal rate for images, by the way, is in fact very low. So even though most periodicals do have images on them, in fact, in our decision guide, our lawyers agreed that if there wasn't a special copyright notice or credit for publication from another source, you generally didn't have to worry about it, but there's still a lot of images you'd like to be able to search for just to be sure. And there'll be work on preparing better resources for that. We can get more basic renewal information, more serials. We've done, as I say, we've already done thousands of serials in the deep backfile, but there are hundreds of thousands, and even just in HathiTrust, that are published during the time period that may be relevant for copyright research. And also, as Christina mentioned, actually winnowing down from those hundreds of thousands of serials to areas that are particularly interested to the community is going to be important as well. And we hope to address all three of these things in the breakouts, as well as Christina mentioned, having a chance to discuss general issues of copyright research and such. But I do want to mention before we go into that, it is often very useful. And we've actually had some success beyond the pilot in focusing on historical serials that are relevant to a specific research question or an area of interest. So Christina already talked about our focus in the pilot, which was in local US history. Christina continued later on looking at serials that were responding in various ways to the spread of tuberculosis in the 20th century, looking at it from various angles, medicine, public health, trade journals dealing with ventilation systems, industrial hygiene, and such. And that is both of interest to people who want to know more about tuberculosis treatment historically, but also, about any other infectious respiratory disease that people might encounter in the future. Likewise, I got interested in serials that were talking in the 1930s and 40s about the rise of authoritarianism and international aggression, in particular, seeing how that was being discussed in political commentary magazines or in religious commentary magazines. And again, that's both of historic interest and more topical today than I would like it to be. But in either case, it's useful to be able to open up that content for other people to look at and address a number of these questions in different ways with different types of serials. So anyway, before we go on, though, into the individual breakouts, since we have a number of the people here, both Christina and Jonah and Scott and Nicolle, who all worked in the serial project, I'd like to take some time now, maybe about no more than 10 minutes, given the time, for people to ask questions, and we'll see them in the chat, about the pilot or about anything else you've seen presented so far. So please. So if one of the HathiTrust moderators wants to feed us questions, we'll answer them as.
Looks like Christina answered one in the chat, and Melissa asks, and I'm not sure who exactly she was directing this towards, but are those set up as collections in HathiTrust? And maybe Melissa could clarify. She was talking about something that Chris.
Yeah, the tuberculosis and the two bodies of material that John was just referring to.
I can answer about so I got on a tear about William Firth Wells, who did research on tuberculosis, because of that one book that helped answer questions about the micron size and transmissibility in aerosols. And so I thought, surely we've got more content by him in HathiTrust. And lo and behold, it was in a lot of serials. So there is an open collection in which I've tried to review quite a lot of the serials that William Firth Wells published in.
Yeah, likewise, the serials I did not set up a HathiTrust collection. And as Christina mentioned, we aren't actually able to, in most cases, to open up, at least I'm not able to open up the serials there, but I was still useful to doing the research. And actually what I did for a number of the serials is I actually linked over to Internet Archive, which has recently scanned a whole bunch of microfilms, not always checking the copyright as thoroughly as I tend to, but I could identify, okay, yes, these runs are in fact public domain, so I will link to them and create collections for those.
Here's one. Is it feasible to select political cartoons in serials versus serials as a focus? Like as a search focus, I believe.
I suppose you could, if you could find good ways to identify them. So if you knew, for instance, of serials that tended to publish cartoons, whether political or otherwise, you might want to focus on that. So for example, I mean, the New Yorker doesn't really do much political cartoons, but they certainly do lots of cartoons. Punch, it's not a US serial, but they do both political and other cartoons and such. And again, you would come up with, you could research them much like you did with other serials. You would have to investigate things like art, where there are separate artwork renewals for some of these. And as I say, hopefully having the presence of more easily searchable artwork renewals would be helpful if that's what you wanted to focus on.
Here is another one. Are there any particular problems in copyright research for serials? Are journals changing names, or are merged or split, or have similar names, or are the entries pretty clear and match the metadata provided?
Do you want me to take that one, John?
Sure. I can add comment too, but yes, you can give the first.
Quite a few of the 103 titles that we found, we tried to capture every HathiTrust record that represented that content. And I think it was over 50% of them, the content was split over several records, and it was actually duplicate content. And on some of them, it was one title, and some it was a preceding title, but the same content was there. And it was all, yes, it's a little difficult to find everything that represents what you're reviewing and what HathiTrust holdings are. I think, yeah, and you kind of have to know when the titles change to know what you're searching and what you should be looking up or not looking up. Because you're trying to prove a negative, you have to know where to search and what to search to know that you accurately searched it.
And if I can just add to that, that's one of the reasons why we didn't look brief in detail at the deep backfile entries, but one of the things you can record in there, and which is very important for these sorts of issues, is yes, not everybody necessarily has the same idea of when a particular title starts and ends. So one of the things you can record in there is, for our purposes, the title starts with this issue and ends with this issue, and this is the predecessor or predecessors, and these are the successors or successors. So if you're looking for a particular trying to investigate a particular issue, you can look it up, and if your notion of the title doesn't match ours, and you can say, okay, I need to go to this, predecessor or this successor record and look to see what's there.
Paul's got a question. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Nicolle.
I would like to add that while doing this project, we did have interesting issues with the metadata where the same item might be cataloged under two very similar titles, and it was the same item in both cases. Just whoever did the cataloging, maybe somebody had the item in hand and somebody did not and was cataloging off a list. So we did have issues with entries like that.
Paul's got another question here. Where would these PD issues and runs wind up? And if in HathiTrust, would they be generally available or only to members?
I mean, if we're researching the volumes in HathiTrust, they would be open, and if they're opened, they would be to anybody in the US, because we're only researching US copyright. And you don't have to be a member to view it, but you'd have to be a member to download it.
Would that also be the case if it were, say, not a Google scan? Or
Right,
still a question
that
to be
restriction is
determined?
only on Google scans.
Yes, as far as I'm aware, and again, I can't speak for HathiTrust, that I would hope they would be made available on the same terms as other things that have been determined to be public domain, such as books from, say, 1950 or 1960. I also have some resources of my own. As I mentioned, I run a site called the Online Books page, which links to a lot of stuff in HathiTrust. Thank you for all those 3 million items, plus links to other sources as well. So as I say, sometimes I'll link to other sources. Sometimes there'll be things like the Internet Archive microfilm scans. Sometimes I'll actually discover that for some of these serials, the publishers have actually decided to put up their own issues for free. And I'm very grateful to that, and I will link to them when I find them.
Any more questions? Feel free to put them in the chat or unmute and ask.
Do Scott and Jonah want to make any particular comments about things about their experience with a pilot that we haven't already talked about?
I guess I would add that it's so fun to be able to look at a full run of a title and to see, like, over the years, there was no notice between these particular years, and then they got maybe a different editorial team these certain years, and you would start to see patterns even just from the get-go. Just looking at the cover page, sometimes you could anticipate, okay, something different's going on here, and that's sort of fun to do. A lot of times you can't judge books at all by their cover, but you sometimes can with serials, and it's quite exciting.
And I think that the biggest issue I noticed in working through the different titles was just the sheer amount of inserts and the different kinds of additional material that weren't original publications that had been included. So there was a lot of images, a lot of reprinting, and that was particularly challenging in terms of like discovering, where are those items? And then the real question I started asking myself was, okay, it's reprinted from this source, and is that source on our list already? Have we already looked at it? How far down the sort of republication rabbit hole do you go to see if you can open something? If I know it's published in this magazine, then do I review that magazine's issues and see if we can open it? Or those kinds of questions were really challenging when we were working on the pilot.
Thank you. And I just want to say I really appreciated the different skills and perspectives of Nicolle, Scott, and Jonah, and Christina, and the others who participated in the pilot. It was both a challenge, but it was also, I very much enjoyed both working on the material and also working with the people on the pilot project.
And John, I don't see any more questions coming in, so I
Okay.
know you're probably eager to get into the breakout rooms.
Yeah, why don't we do that? We're yeah, this section went along a little longer than we want. I mean, even before we knew that this would go along, we know that the work we're describing here, we can only really get started or a taste of this work. Although my hope is that for each of the breakouts, the work that we describe here, and you'll start being able to do, is work that if you're interested in, you could potentially continue after this workshop session if you wanted to. And our very last slide, we'll basically do the workshops until a little after 20 minutes past the hour. It's just coming up to the hour now. And I'll wrap up with a couple of slides summarizing what we've done, but also pointing to a page from the Deep Backfile project where we'll have links back to resources. If you want to continue on any of the work that you've started or learned about here, you may be able to do so. So we've got 3 breakouts plus people staying around in the main room. Breakout 1 is especially for proofreaders and transcribers. I'm going to stop the share for a moment. Oh, actually, let me share so people can see the slide. Let me just do that again.
And you will be able to join whichever breakout room you'd like. The folks who signed up. Yeah, go ahead, John.
It's all right. So people are interested particularly in transcribing or proofreading. We have those gap years where we don't have good searchable artwork copyright renewal records. We've got raw OCR from Internet Archive, and you're welcome to sign up and actually start. You'll only be able to start proofreading or formatting some of those files, so we can eventually reassemble that, after we've double checked them, reassemble that into something people can search. And Nicolle will be leading that breakout. Breakout 2 will be for those that are interested in learning more about copyright research. In this one, I'll be leading it, and I'll be walking through that questionnaire I showed you briefly in the presentation, where you can basically find and enter basic information, answer some basic questions about HathiTrust serials that we don't have copyright information on, but might be in the public domain. So join that one if you're interested in that. Breakout 3 is interested, I say, especially for bibliographers, but as Jonah points out, it's potentially, librarians or people of all sorts of interests who just want to talk about or identify for themselves particular serials or topics of particular interest, areas of particular interest that would be good to focus on and maybe get some concerted effort on, whether it's to open them in HathiTrust or doing further research on them, their copyrights or otherwise. So that will be that breakout. That's going to be led by Jonah and Scott. And if you stick around here in the main room, you'll get to hear and talk with Christina, who's done a lot of work practically determining copyrights, both for serials and a bunch of other stuff. And you can participate in a discussion on issues that come up in this sort of research. So as I say, you can pick which group you want to go to or stay here, and we'll reassemble here in about 20 minutes. Thank you.
Well, and I'll say that if you just want to lurk and you're working on other stuff, feel free to just stay in the main room and lurk. I'm not going to actually ask you to do anything, but if you just want to keep an ear to it and hang around, you're welcome. I'll maybe have a couple people looking at some journals and trying to find things that are reprinted content and stuff.
So thank you again for all of you for staying around. I just want to recap and thank people for what we've accomplished here, which is quite a lot, even though we've had to cut short things. As you've seen, we've shown a set of resources, both data and procedures, that you can use. I mean, not just HathiTrust, but anybody can use to help clear copyrights of serial content that's of interest to you. And we've shown how those resources have been used to investigate copyrights of serial content and HathiTrust in the small scale and the pilot that Christina talked about. And that potentially leaves the possibility of opening that content either in HathiTrust or elsewhere. And we've shown some ways in the breakout if you've gone to the breakouts, you've had at least a taste of ways that you can actually help add to resources we've discussed too, making it easier to identify or copyright clear more serials of interest. And I'm hoping if you got interested in that and either want to continue that work or start that work, if you didn't have a chance to do any, you can continue work on that later. I'll have a URL to resources where you can continue work if you would like. And I just want to say, but both in these workshops and in all of this work that went before the pilot, the metadata creation, and so on. This is built on really the labor of many librarians and other interested people all over both the country and the world. And your labor there is often overlooked, but we very much appreciate it. And we hope that it will do good things in the time to come, both for this and for other projects. So again, on behalf of everybody, all my co-presenters, I want to thank you for coming to this workshop. If you want to get in touch with me further, my email address is in this slide, and this URL, which I'll also post into the chat, will go to the link to the deep backfile project, which will have links to the slide, and I'll also put in links to recordings and to other resources that people might want to share out of this research. There is a survey that is available that will be sent to you after the session. Please complete it. There are some questions related to this session, such as, do you want to actually continue working on some of this, or should there be more projects like this at HathiTrust or elsewhere? And if you want to talk to it on social media, either on Twitter or elsewhere, you can use this hashtag HTCW2022 or 22 to talk about it and share it with other people. And again, just thank you so much for all of this. And I will stop sharing here.